this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or
The
news.
single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget.
Welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Craig Dowden, a certified positive psychology coach and author of Do Good to Lead Well, The Science and Practice of Positive Leadership. What suggestions would you give for someone who just isn't comfortable giving or receiving feedback, which I got to believe is most people?
Yeah, it's so fast. Like, feedback rarely is, hey, Clint, we have to talk, followed up with, ooh, boy, this is going to be awesome.
Can't wait.
Yeah, exactly. No matter the context. And it is one of those things that, and Doug Stone out of Harvard, and he's written a lot of fantastic books and has done a lot of great research in this space. When he goes around the world coaching people, leaders, organizations around difficult conversations and feedback conversations, when he says, what are the most challenging discussions you have? Feedback. And there's data that shows that managers, leaders, executives hate them, and employees hate. It's one of those rare moments in an organization where you get full alignment between the executive team and employees. Like, we both dislike this. And it's very, very challenging. And I think what gets in the way is a couple of things. Number one, it's very difficult for us to receive negative feedback because we take it as an indictment of the quality of our character or our identity. And fundamentally, at its core, feedback is a reflection in time, it's a moment in time, and it's a behavior that now I'm empowered to do something about. So I think that in and of itself can get in the way of the feedback conversation. Or the other piece is that sometimes we react to how the feedback is delivered versus what the feedback is. So we actually get caught up in the delivery mechanism. So it wasn't delivered in the nicest way or the best way. And then we throw it out because we didn't like how it was delivered, yet the feedback may still be relevant even if the person wasn't expert in its delivery.
Any tips on making it more palatable?
Well, I think for the feedback provider, this is one of those mic drop moments for me, just kind of mind expanding research studies where they showed that managing the mood of the feedback recipient is 3 times more important to how well that feedback is received than the actual way in which the feedback is delivered. So boiling that down, putting it into practice, that means if I take care of your mood and manage the relationship between you and I as we go through this conversation, I can totally flub how I'm telling you the feedback. You'll see it as going well. On the reverse, I could deliver a master class in how I'm saying the feedback. If I fail to manage the mood, the connection, the emotion, then it's going to go off the rails. So being very mindful of how we manage the context and manage the relationship is far more important than what we're actually going to say. When it comes back to us, so suggestions for ourselves, so we can go out and tell people, please give me feedback. And in particular, when I'm doing or saying something that is not having a positive effect, you know who I am and what I'm about. I'm not going to see this. And please point it out, because without you, I'm essentially flying blind. So I trust you. I'd rather hear it from you than someone else who isn't part of my inner circle. And then the other Jedi technique we can use is tell people how you want to receive feedback. So, hey, I want to hear what you have to say. Please do it because I'm counting on you because you're an invaluable person in my network, my community. And when you do it, here are some ways in which I love to receive it. And hey, if you present it this way, I'm likely going to react. Again, if you say purple, I'm going to go. I'm not going to be as open. So we can really be proactive in helping people around us recognize we want it and then how we want to digest that meal.
I also found that, because you and I have talked about this in the past, there are specific questions you should ask when soliciting feedback that I found fascinating. Can you share those with us?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's a whole bunch of questions that we can ask for people when it comes to how to receive feedback. So as an example, if you were me, what's one thing that you would put at the top of your development when it comes to investing in my development? Like, what's one area you think I should be focusing on developing? Here's another one. On the flip side, if you were me, what's one strength that you feel that I don't leverage enough? Like, what's one of my, so not just to always be focusing on the negative. Again, it's like, hey, how do I capitalize on the positive, the stuff that, really drives who I am? Here's one of my favorites, again, back to the Jedi, is to say, hey, what's one thing that you think that people are uncomfortable sharing with me about me? And I can pretend that I'm able to share what I want to say under the guise of someone else. So I think that's really powerful. You can also ask, what can I do to receive better feedback from the people around me? All those kinds of questions. And what's crucial is, regardless, and there are so many different forms we can use, what's critical is to make them open-ended. Rather than say, am I a good husband, or do I do a good job as your leader? Well, right? Like, that's going to come out. That's going to be, it almost demands a yes. So what would you say that I do well? What are some of the areas where I can improve? That opens up the conversation in a much more impactful way.
We kind of touched on this, but I am, for one, somebody who has a hard time receiving negative feedback, because I know my intentions are always good and I try really hard. And I suspect most people are like that. In fact, give you an example. Last year, I had a client who gave me some feedback on a session that I just delivered. I've been with them for 6 hours on the session, and they sent me the email. The exact words in the email were, "Congratulations on a rock star rating. This is such an important piece of our program, and we're always fortunate to have you deliver it," you underlined. Now, that, of course, said a very powerful, that awesome. I feel really good about myself. But then as I was flipping through the comments some of the students made, there were 8 specific comments from the students that were included in this feedback, 6 of which were all extremely positive. 1 person wanted more breaks, and 1 person had a negative comment. And man, all I could think about was that negative comment. Why does that seem to weigh more on us than the other 7 positives, and rock star rating all goes out the window because 1 person had something bad to say?
Yeah, it's, again, one of those hiccups in our human operating system. And there was actually a really powerful review paper done some time ago in the annual review of psychology, and it was called "Bad is Stronger Than Good." We are naturally, and it comes from our evolutionary history, right, where we're kind of constantly looking out for threats in our environment. And the evidence tells us we need a lot more positive pieces of information to make up for the negative. And so it's just a natural human response, and we can tend to go into defense mode. And we all experience it. I think a couple of things. Number one is to put it into a broader context. As you said, you have 8 people. Basically, you had a rock star status. 7 of 8 people thought it was amazing. 1 asking for additional breaks. That's nothing to do with the content. So then in the grand scheme of things, your content was landing, impacting. It was incredibly powerful. Feedback is just data. It doesn't provide a really strong judgment on who I am. It doesn't pass judgment on my quality as a human being. It's one event, one moment in time. What can I learn from it? The other piece is that now we have the power to decide what to do with the feedback. Do I choose to follow this or not? And I'm always at the end. Someone gives me a piece of feedback. I can choose whether or not I want to do anything about it. It's also important to recognize this is a moment in time. Even if the piece of feedback is accurate, let's say, having an off day or what have you, in that one person picked up on it, we can still sit with it and say, now this is an empowerment opportunity. Now this provides me with a pathway to move forward. The most challenging part of a feedback conversation is kind of putting our ego to the side and saying, okay, And one of the best questions that I've come across, and I referenced Doug Stone earlier, one of the ways in which we approach feedback, particularly negative feedback, is we'll say, we look for what's wrong. I shared earlier, right? If it was delivered in a really harsh way, I throw it out. Not because it's wrong, I just didn't like how they told me about it. He says, rather than asking ourselves what's wrong with the feedback, we should flip the question on its head and ask, what's right about it? And I think that is awesome. Now, we can choose to say nothing and move on. That's totally fine. I think what's powerful, though, is sitting with it and saying, what's right about it? Really trying to tap into our empathy, if you will. Okay, so what is it that this person is trying to tell me, and how do I relate? And here's the thing. I can either choose to fully incorporate, I can choose to take what they said and make a tweak, or I can choose to say, you know what? I'm pretty happy being a rock star.
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep that, right? I'm going to keep that thread.
Yeah, I think that's actually, I did two things. One is I looked at the feedback and said, well, that's exactly what I meant for it to be. So I've just got it wasn't resonating with that person, but it's resonated with everybody else. And the other thing is I have to remind myself that, listen, if 7 people say fantastic and one says something bad, then that's still pretty good odds, right? You're still doing pretty good.
Absolutely.
As a follow-up to something you mentioned a few minutes ago about neither senior management nor the people receiving the feedback enjoy it. They both think it's not value added and they don't look forward to it at all. In the book, you tell the story of Adobe and how it changed the whole way it handled performance reviews back in 2012. What did they do and why?
Yeah, this is a really powerful and kudos, I have to say, for all of the different nuggets you're pulling out of the book. That's wonderful in terms of the level of detail that you went into. So this is great. What Adobe did, it was fascinating. Every organization does a performance review every year. And they started to get curious because essentially feedback on the ground was this was not a good use of time. Like there was countless hours invested. And what was really troubling is that, and this is, they found it within Adobe, you find it elsewhere, like the majority of employees say it provides zero benefit. Like it doesn't impact how they do their work whatsoever. Yet all of the financial investment, the time invested, the emotion invested, and they just thought there's got to be a different way, a better way. Let's experiment with, let's basically throw out the formal performance reviews and let's just have informal performance conversations so that it's essentially, it's almost like a do-it-yourself performance review. Let's just talk about performance every day when it's relevant rather than, oh, Clint did something, so I got to write that down. So 6 months from now, we'll get to revisit it. It just wasn't functional. So they wanted to take a whole new approach.
And they saw some pretty significant benefits, if I recall.
Yeah, it saved like so much money. It saved so much time. They said like the number of wasted hours doing this, the amount of dollars from an investment of time, it was just extraordinary. And now they're just like, we are not doing this ever again. When it's once a year, it becomes this scary conversation, like, Clint, we need to talk. And now you got to come in and it's just going to be this uncomfortable hierarchical dance and justify what you've done or not done. And so it's just, the mechanics are so terrible from a relationship standpoint and from a conversation standpoint. So now it's, let's just have daily conversations. Let's do it and make it natural so that you can raise things with me, I can raise things with you, and it's not a big deal.
And I think the key there is also it can be positive feedback, right? You did a great job as opposed to, oh, here comes Clint. Here I'm in trouble again.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so little time is spent. Well, and here's another tool that research has shown to be ineffective, which was thrown around as well, the compliment sandwich, right? Where, hey, here's a positive thing, and then I'm going to share the negative thing and then close with the positive thing. So now everyone saw that coming a gazillion miles away. And they're like, okay, just get to the negative thing because you're just trying to sandwich this in to get to the negative meat burger, right? And so what we need to be able to start to do is let's focus on everything. And I think so Doug Stone, again, who I mentioned earlier, like 90% of employees, there was a US Department of Labor study, 90% of employees say they feel underappreciated. 90%. So the positive feedback is equally, and research would suggest is more powerful than the negative. And so let's spend our time focusing on that.
I think the thing about the Adobe story that really pleasantly surprised me was I understood the saving the money and the hours and how that helped, but there was actually retention was increased. Employees got more engaged. I mean, it was such a powerful thing to not have this once or twice a year, everybody dreaded it event.
Absolutely. Because again, now we're addressing things in real time. So back to our feedback discussion, right? Well, 6 months from now, you raise something that I did today. Like 6 days from now, it's going to be challenging to go back and recreate. I've got 6 months, so there's so many memories in place. Then on top of that, I'm wondering, what are you waiting 6 months for? And how can I possibly take action? On top of that, I'm likely going to have interacted or faced similar circumstances, making the same mistake over and over and over again. And it makes feedback this boogeyman, right? That it's like, oh, the big thing. We all benefit from feedback. And now if you tell me, hey, Craig, you know what? Like at the end of this interview, here's something that you can do. Now I get it. And now I can learn. And now I can ask questions. And now I can take that and propel me forward. Isn't that what feedback is? It's information that we hope someone takes and puts into action immediately.
Yeah, and each of us is different. I have some people who work for me that if I told them we were going to have annual feedback, they'd quit, right?
Right.
And then I've got other people who will call me monthly and go, hey, I'd like a session to talk about feedback. So it's just everybody, it's not a one size fits all, I suppose. And what I know doesn't work is my flip answer to the person who's always asking me about for feedback. I'm like, you get feedback every 2 weeks and my name is signed on your paycheck. That's feedback. I probably need to get a little better than that. So,
Well, and what I love about what you're saying though, is back to, and I think that's such an important success factor for leaders, is being respectful of how other people are. So and being empathetic to their cause. So here's a great case example of two of the pillars, right? So you're not going in and saying everybody in this organization, monthly, biannually, whatever, you're saying I respect what you're looking for in terms of the feedback frequency. And then on top of that, I'm going to deliver it and in a way in which that most matches what you're looking for. That is, again, building powerful conversations, powerful relationships. And now I don't feel like I'm put into this machinery that doesn't really connect with me.
This is kind of a subtle nuance, but I often get asked questions when I'm being interviewed about what's the best way to give feedback, the best vehicle. And to me, it's always face-to-face. And if not face-to-face, at least like on a Zoom call, because so much of communication happens through nonverbal. It's through the body language, the obvious rolling of the eyes, the you can see somebody getting frustrated, and you can't, to your point earlier, it's really hard to adjust the mood that I'm creating if I can't see what's happening to you.
You're so right, and that is at the heart of authentic, powerful conversation, connection, relationships. And when we deliver, email is great to summarize facts. Hey, you and I get together, we have a conversation about a project we want to launch, and then one of us or both of us sits down and writes up what we thought we agreed and send it back. Okay, fantastic. Feedback, no tone of voice, no body language. So if you say something or I say something to you and it causes you to fold your arms, or you get flushed, or you push your chair back, or you start to check your phone, I don't see that. And it doesn't enable me now to, again, explore that in real time. And then what's worse, you're carrying all of that negative energy and building this strong case about how I don't care, how could I possibly say that? And again, these crucial conversations aren't happening between us.
Yeah, so now you got a shield up that I can't get my message through the shield.
Exactly, because now, and then back to our own judgment, it's that, oh, well, Clint said this because of X and Y. And again, you have no idea that the word purple sent me off on a tirade, and that's because you didn't have that visual data, you didn't have the vocal data to determine that.
And I suspect, I don't know this to be a fact, but I suspect that many people don't realize the nonverbal cues they put off. They don't even realize they folded their arms or that their face is flushed. And there's so many cues we get as the other side of the conversation that's given to us when it's not through email or text and it's not through phone call. It's just so many other things.
Well, I love that you say that again, and selfishly speak, because it links to self-awareness, right? Because we think that we're aware of those cues, and you put it beautifully. We're often not. We're woefully blind to the cues that we can be given off, which is where, when we enlist the support of the people around us and say, hey, when I'm showing up at this client meeting or this internal meeting, I want you to observe my behavior and let me know if, when you think I'm showing up in a good state and a negative state, like what did the client respond to positively, negatively? All those data points are key. And we often think that we're kind of the ultimate poker player when it comes to our emotions. Stuff leaks out of us. And without care, attention, inputs from our environment, we don't see it. We think, oh, the client loved us. And the people around us are going, are you kidding me? Like, you look totally disengaged, or they're totally disengaged. And you haven't picked up on that.
And again, I'm not a social scientist, but I think just observationally, I think it's almost, you get in that fight or flight mode that, we evolved over eons, and all of a sudden, if you're attacking me, I'm back in my fight or flight. I'm going to start fighting back against you, or I'm going to try to figure out a way to leave the conversation as quickly as possible.
You're absolutely right. And what's crucial is, and then to me, and going back to what we were talking about in terms of the success, this represents a really powerful moment, because someone's coming after me with a concern. They're highly agitated. Well, now, to your point, fight or flight is one option, and options that we tend to consider. I'm just going to get out of here and bail, or I'm going to go back and knock them down, versus sitting and saying, okay, what makes you say that? Right? Like, how can I make this different? Like, I'm sorry that that's what I communicated. Like, I'm sorry I said that. And then working with the person. There was a great quote by the psychiatrist Mark Goldstein, who's written a lot of different books on listening. And he said, and I'll paraphrase, but basically it's like, when the conversation gets to its most heated moment, show the other person your neck. Be vulnerable. Because we do expect, and I love that you mention it, fight or flight. When I show up, you're there ready to strike me with the axe, and I kind of lean my neck. It's jarring. It's really, wow, okay. And it's such a powerful tool because it's unexpected.
Right. Well, since this podcast is called The Conversation, tell us about the power of replacing the word but with and in conversations with others.
Yeah, and I love the work of Marshall Goldsmith. He's been the top-rated executive coach in the world multiple years and has done such extraordinary work. And he came up in one of his best-selling books. He talks about doing a butt audit, B-U-T, and because so many of us use this phrase, and it creates so much disconnection from a conversational perspective. So as an example, I love you, but no one hears the I love you. But basically eliminates everything that precedes it. A corporate example, well, I appreciate that idea, but okay, well, if you did appreciate, now you're going to tell me why you don't appreciate it. So don't butter me up that way. And this is where it creates a real challenge, because we're having an unintended impact on people. What we want to do is replace but with and. I love that idea, and I don't see how it connects with the timeline that we propose for our customer, versus I love the idea, but triggers defensiveness and validates the idea and then shares our curiosity or uncertainty. So it doesn't diminish to make our point. And what I love about Marshall's point is he suggested, and I did one myself, the but audit, which basically you tell people, hey, if I use the word but in conversation, fine me $1, $2, $5, so I'm aware. And I did this with my team, and I was intimately familiar with the practice and the work. And I spent a fortune in pizza parties and local charities, which were all fabulous. And even with that knowledge, it's striking how often we use that term and how much disconnection it creates for us.
That's such a powerful word, the word and, because it's inclusive as opposed to the word but, which is, as you said, very exclusive. It's either this or that. You either respected my idea or you really didn't.
Exactly. And is the ultimate connector. It builds that bridge, as you say. And then so here's one of the most powerful tools, and it's around conversation. There's a fantastic book called The Power of a Positive No. And so many people struggle with how to say no. And what it means, we either fight and argue against the other person, or more often than not, we agree to do stuff that we don't want to do, and I'm mad at you for quote unquote making me do something. And the whole methodology is built around and this is what I love about it. And it's essentially yes, no, yes, question mark. So as a quick example, yes, Clint, I know that you want to deliver this project or like to have my contribution to this project by 4:00 today. I have another commitment with the CEO of our highest performing client. How about I do this tomorrow? So I'm validating your need and expressing mine and proposing an alternative. So again, it's connecting that rather than saying, I'd love to do it, but it's, I know you want to have it by 4 and I have this tomorrow. How about X?
That's great. That's a great comment. So I know we said we focus on self-awareness in this segment, but I want to finish up by briefly touching on the empathy pillar. I saw a talk where you said the number one predictor for team success was psychological safety. Can you elaborate on that?
This is a construct, an idea that's gotten a lot of attention over the last few years. And now more than ever, with everything that's happening in terms of the global pandemic and conversations that are happening societally around psychological safety. And Amy Edmondson from Harvard, she did some research wanting to look at this, and she uncovered this piece. And what I think is really cool about her work was that she went into hospitals to try to figure out, one, to look at performance. And there's a lot of research around what makes the top performing teams. And what she expected for her dissertation was the best teams had the fewest errors. And in fact, what she found was the opposite. Those teams that you would think on paper, right, like constituted effective teams, they actually had more errors. What was interesting is that they didn't have more errors, they reported more errors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you came to patient care, complications were reduced, lives saved were increased, right? Because now we're getting that crucial patient care information to the forefront. And so what she talks about, psychological safety, essentially represents the extent to which I feel comfortable sharing my ideas, my perspectives, without fear of personal reprisal. So I can ask the dumb question. I can make an observation, make the quote unquote dumb statements, and there's safety that's okay. We can disagree vehemently. It's constructive. It's respectful. I feel comfortable sharing contrarian information. That is at the heart of psychological safety. And teams and organizations that do this more effectively have higher engagement, higher collaboration, higher innovation, higher performance, because all the stuff you need to get to the surface early is done so effectively.
And we see that in project work a lot. And I tell project managers all the time, this would also apply to leaders, is you need to create a culture where people are absolutely okay with telling you the truth. Because if your mentality is shoot the messenger, then as a team member, I'm thinking, okay, that's not going to happen again. Right. And now I'm going to hide bad news when, I always tell people, listen, I understand there's going to be bad news in project work and in real life. I'm okay with that because it's just real life. What I'm not okay with is bad news you've known about for months that are only now sharing with me at the last second, that if you just shared it to me in the beginning, we could have fixed it. And the problem is I'm the one at fault because I created that environment where you didn't feel comfortable sharing that with me.
Exactly. And I think it is a principle that applies across any life domain you want to choose. And I love your example on the project management side. As information continue to accrue and things get more and more complicated, 3 months ago when this was an issue, now it's going to be massive trying to go back and rewrite, or it didn't work out. Like you launch it and it's a colossal disaster. And someone's like, well, I didn't rate. And say, how come? We have to create an environment, I'm so with you, where people do feel comfortable immediately sharing that, no matter what it's about. Even if it's again, in a conversation, you say something that offends me or affects me, it's important for me to share that quickly, because otherwise it stays in me and it bubbles and bubbles and bubbles. And now you do something 6 weeks from now and I launch all over it. You're like, where did that come from? That is from 6 weeks ago where I didn't deal with something. And now you've given me the opportunity to surface that volcano.
And to put a bow on this whole conversation, I think it's also it's inherent on the person to actually make sure that they're willing to communicate. Because I think we have this human nature is to think to ourselves, well, it's not working today, but I'm confident in my abilities. And I'm sure my intention is I'll get this thing fixed before anybody knows. Right.
Exactly. And one of my favorite, the road to hell being paved with good intentions. How many of us will say New Year's resolutions, right? How many people, and I don't even need to do a straw poll for the listeners, right? Like the research is abundantly clear. Every year we make New Year's resolutions and then follow up, not even in February, like do it mid-January. And how many people are like, well, I had a couple of false starts. I've had a mulligan or two. They're gone. So you're absolutely right that we have this, well, I'll eventually get to it. And then it goes and goes and goes. And it just gets bigger. The problem gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, look at that. We planted the seed in the very beginning of the conversation and we came back and harvested the road to hell. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. I expected nothing less. That's fantastic. And it is a wonderful way to tie a bow on this.
So, Craig, you've been an awesome guest, as I expected you would be, having seen you speak and having known you for a couple of years. Thanks for being here today and sharing your wealth of knowledge. I really hope you'll come back soon and talk more about empathy or some of the other pillars. Until then, if listeners want to buy your book, learn more about you, or engage with you further, how can they do that?
So the book's available on Amazon. They can find out more about me on my website, craigdowden.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, so I'd be happy to connect. Tell me that Clint sends you along, and I'd love to have a conversation. And because this has been fantastic, and it's always a pleasure to be able to connect and discuss these important topics. And I have tremendous respect for you and the work that you do, and how you're looking to really stimulate powerful conversation and knowledge sharing and community building. And I think that's a wonderful quality. So the pleasure's been all mine, and I'd be happy to come by anytime.
All right. Well, I appreciate the kind words, Craig. Thanks for the conversation.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett. To find out more about Clint, go to projectsuccess.com or pick up Clint's book, The Project Success Method, at amazon.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.